First of all, I'm very honored to be here tonight. I was asked by Brent to give a talk about a library I created, and yeah, like I said, I'm very, very honored to be here. A little bit about myself. My name is Hein Rutjes, GitHub IJzeren Hein. Sorry, a little bit nervous there. I'm a software developer from the Netherlands. And I'm a freelance software developer, by the way, and I built React Native applications for clients. Apart from that, I have various interests in psychology and especially also animations, and sometimes I try to combine those two. I'm also the author of AutoLayout.js, in case you know it, which is a JavaScript implementation of Apple's AutoLayout. And as well, Firestore, which is a React to Firestore binding, in case you're interested. It uses Mobix, by the way, thanks to the great Michel, who's talking after me. But tonight we're going to talk about Magic Move. So, what is Magic Move? Well, Magic Move, the term, was first introduced in Keynote, the presentation tool by Apple. And it was used to, if you have two slides, you could basically say, all right, I want this object to be animated to the other object. So, and on the second slide, it might have a different dimension. It also might be in a different position, and then Keynote would make this transition happen, basically. In software development, we typically refer to this as a shared element transition. A Magic Move basically is synonymous to a shared element transitions. I will use both of them in my talk. Here we have an example of a shared element transition. This is taken from the Android documentation. I thought it was really nice. You see a list of contacts. Each contact has a photo, it has a name. When you click on the element, you basically transition to a new scene. The photo and the name are animated to that scene. And you know, there's some other elements that are faded in. There's some bottom-up animations going on. It looks really nice. So why do we do this kind of thing? Why do we do shared element transitions? Well, one of the main reasons is to communicate context. So by doing this animation, you pretty much instantly know that you've clicked the right item. And it's also as in with real life. You know, in real life, things just don't appear and disappear. It's not like David Copperfield is around the corner or something. But things move around. So our brains are very, very well wired to process this kind of information. Another thing is to add a sense of delight to your application. This is one of many things that you can do to, I think, to build, to convert a good application into a great application. But there are some challenges in doing shared element transitions. One of the things is who is responsible for what. For instance, the router is typically responsible for keeping track of your routes, obviously, for keeping track of your navigation stack, but also doing often some sideways animations. And your view is just responsible for showing the content inside that view. But with shared element transitions, you have to get inside the view, figure out which elements you need to transition. There's often two views that play a role. So there's sort of like a dance. I added a little dance icon there as well. So, and then there's the question: who is responsible for this shared element that's being drawn onto the screen? So both screens have this same element. But you can, yeah. How do we deal with that? You know, do you remove it from one scene and then put it into another? Does it work like that? Can you manipulate your view hierarchy like that? So this is a tricky question to answer. How do you deal with that? And then there's the question of seamless transition. So if you want to do a transition, then it has to be perfect. So in case of my library, it's sort of like an illusion that you're trying to create. But it has to be convincing, otherwise it will fail. And there's also the question is, sometimes your source element on your source scene is different than the one on your target scene. So it might have a different dimension, the size is different, it might have rounded corners or something like that. It may be obviously in a different position. So you need to account for that. You need to deal with that. So introducing a little library I wrote this last December, you know, when you're sitting with the family and you have way too much time on your hands, you're thinking of other stuff. And I really like animations, so I figured, well, why not try to create a shared element transition library? That's fun, right? And but more importantly, I tried to put some artsy stuff in there. So really try to work with the transition effects as well. A React Native Magic Move is a standalone solution, which means it's not a router, but it's really a separate component that takes care of the scene animations. And important to that is to notice that it uses clones. So it basically draws an overlay in front of the screen, and it performs the animations in that overlay. So it's sort of like scene friendly. It doesn't actually it doesn't manipulate your screens too much. And it has a variety of transition effects, which is still very much a work in progress, but I'll show a bit more about that later. Oh yeah, and it has optional native optimizations, which is kind of important because this means you can use it as from a pure JavaScript environment. So you can use it in Expo, just like that, but you can also use it with React Native Web, and it works remarkably well. But native optimizations do have a definite purpose because of the shared element transitions. They require sort of a timing. It's a very delicate balance, sort of like a dance that you have to do with hiding elements and showing them. We'll show that later. And the native optimizations really help to optimize, and it reduces some of the jumps back and forth over the JavaScript bridge. And they're especially important for images. We'll get back to that later. And there's a React navigation binding. So basically what this does is you just install it, and then some state information is exchanged with React navigation, and then a Magic Move knows how to start and stop the scenes and transitions. Yeah, a little disclaimer. Yeah, let's watch that a couple of times. It's really fun. Like, where does he end up? Is it this? There he goes again. Just gonna show this for a couple of minutes now. Now, the disclaimer here is that I wrote this presentation in React Native, as you can kind of see with the iPad there. And all the animations, all the transitions are basically Magic Move transitions. So what I tried to, I figured this would be an easy way to build this presentation. What better way to show Magic Move animations with your own Magic Move library? And at the time, it also helped me figure out some bugs. So that was good. But I do know there's going to be a glitch here and there. So the very careful eye might spot them here and there. And I also know that if I switch the slides too quickly, I'll break it. So I hope I don't do that. But then again, I can just reload like this, and bam. So we can go back to the slide. So it works really well. Let's continue on that. I want to demonstrate a thing or two with this lithograph from a countryman called Escher. And he made these beautiful drawings. And if you look at them, they're really not possible. But that's really so cool about him. He sort of transitions from one thing to another, and it's seamless. It's really nice. And this one's called Relativity. And I know for a fact that he wanted to be an animator, but he grew up in a different time. And yeah, he learned the art of lithography, and therefore he did this kind of thing, and I'm very thankful for that. I want to demonstrate the Magic Move process with this transition. So this is pretty nice. You kind of have two elements on the first sheet, and then you go into sort of like a details slide, and you see the logo and the text there, but also some additional content is faded in, and it moves to the top a little bit, and it looks nice. And I want to illustrate that. I want to illustrate what needs to be done to make this happen. I realize that this is a React Native presentation, and there's a lot of React.js and web developers in the room. So I hope this information also is a little bit valuable for you guys, and it's probably relevant to all front-end work that you would do. So we have basically two slides here. One master slide and a detail slide. So one of the first things we would need to do to make a shared element transition is to identify. We need to figure out what do we want to transition from one slide to another. And the second thing is we need to measure. We need to figure out where is this? How big is it? What's the position from the left top of the scene? You can kind of see that the right slide, it might be off screen. So if you have a router like React Navigation, this thing might be off screen. So you have to, if you calculate the right element, you have to calculate it to the left top of the scene, not of your screen. So that's an important distinction. And then we need to hide the target. We need to hide the source, but then we don't see anything. So we render a clone. And this clone is rendered in an overlay in front of the screen. And then obviously we need to animate that clone to the next scene. We need to hide the clone, and we need to show the original target. And all these things need to happen in the right order, quickly enough, so that this is a convincing illusion and transition for you. Let's go back to the main screen. Let's look at it one more time. Cool. We're going to see a little bit of code now. So what would you need to do in your React Native application to add this functionality? Well, obviously, you need to add the magic move package. You need to import it. And you need to wrap your app in a magicmove.provider. So the provider makes it possible to render an overlay after your app. You can kind of see it there. This overlay is rendered there. And additionally, you need to wrap all your screens in a magicmove.scene, at least the ones that you want to put animations in. The scene makes it possible to do the correct relative calculation of your elements, but it also helps in communicating state with React Navigation, with the binding. But technically, it could work with any router. Obviously, and then the next step is to replace image and text with a magicmove.image and a magicmove.text. And we need to give them unique IDs. And we need to do this on both screens. And now magicmove has enough information to make the animations happen. And for the other animation that you saw on the screen, so that was the fade-in of the content. In this case, I just used Animatable, which I think is an awesome library. And I just replaced text with animatable.text and put a fade-in up animation there. So here's some additional props that you can use. So there's obviously there's the ID, there's the transition that you can change. By default, it uses the move transition, but I'll get back to that later. You can set things like duration, the delay, the easing function. But there's also a z-index. And the z-index is important if you have multiple shared element transitions on your screen. Maybe you have this big image, and you want all the text, make sure that they're rendered in front of it. So you can use the z-index to basically change your order. With disabled, you can disable an animation entirely. With debug, you can render, you can sort of like create bullet time, but we're going to show that later. And it also renders out a lot of information to the console. But you can also create your custom components. So out of the box, magicmove supports the view, image, and text components. But if you want, you can also wrap an existing component like fast image. You might be using that in your application to reduce some flickering. You can wrap that as well, and that will work great. So let's take a look at some transitions. Now the fun starts. These are the transitions that are supported out of the box. So there's a move, morph, dissolve, flip, squash, and stretch, shrink and grow. But you can also create your own if you want to. let's take a look at these transitions. So I chose a couple of them, and I also added an experimental, which is very much a work in progress, but I want to talk a little bit about that. So here, basically, I'm just switching two slides now. And Magic Move is doing all the effects and transitions between these slides. It's kind of fast. So let's enable the debug prop. And you can kind of see what's going on. And I want to briefly iterate through all these transitions. Let's take a look at that again. So the move transition, that's the default transition. What it does is it renders a single clone onto your screen, and it basically scales and moves it around. So it doesn't resize it. It only does a scaling and translation transform on it. So resizing is one of those things that you cannot do because it is not natively optimized. It would cause a relayout in Yoga, in the Flexbox engine. So you want to try to avoid that. Let's take a look at the second one, which is a morph. And the morph is actually intended to, if you have two elements which are distinctly different, to animate between them. And what it does is it basically renders two clones, and it does sort of a crossfade between them, but it also changes the scale of the elements, and it changes the border radius. And this creates quite a convincing animation. You can see it again. And below the morph, there's the dissolve, which is actually very similar to the morph, but I wanted to include it because now you can see the dissolve is basically a crossfade, but it doesn't do the border radius. Oh shit, now I messed it up. Someone was laughing really out loud here. Oh, Brent. Brent was laughing really loud. Look at again at the dissolve effect. You can kind of see that both elements are rendered on the screen. So that's why generally the morph is a better solution. But what I wanted to do with morph is maybe in the future have some other effects do it. Maybe do some rasterization of the content and maybe do some image morphing on it. That's why I left the dissolve in. And then there's the flip and the squash and stretch. The flip is, yeah, it just a flip, and then it reveals the other content on the back side. And then it's the squash and stretch, and it's kind of inspired by Disney's animation laws. And the last one is the experimental, which I think is really fun. It actually splits up the element into multiple elements. So you can animate those individually. I think it's personally very interesting because when you have the native optimizations enabled here, then there's actually a very cheaply rendered clone onto your screen. It's sort of like a visual, visual clone of your actual component, and it's very cheaply to render multiple of these. So you could easily render hundreds of these on your screen and create really fun effects. But that's just still a work in progress. I want to illustrate some of the problems with image transitions. So, for instance, here we have an image at the bottom of the screen, and imagine I want to animate this to the top of the screen. Maybe this is a list with items, and I want to show a detailed screen for that. So, as you can see, normally if you take this element and you just scale it, then you get this effect. So you can kind of see it stretches up both sides. So this is not what you want. So maybe better if we, for instance, do a dissolve on it. Kind of see that's better, but you can kind of see that there's still a transition going on there. Even better is if we can actually figure out what content of the image is not being shown and which is being shown. So in this case, this image has the prop resize mode set to cover. So it basically means that in this case, the top a top part of the image is hidden and actually a bottom part is being clipped away. So would it be cool if we could actually reveal that? And yes, we can. And this technique actually doesn't resize the image in any form of way. It uses multiple views with overflow is hidden to basically resize the views inside of it to create this effect. It's kind of difficult to explain, I'm realizing now. You can check the code. And then there's also the border radius correction. So you want to have this kind of thing. This is also a transform that you can do cheaply, so because it doesn't affect the layout. But it is important. So imagine you have an avatar and you click on this user and you want to see this full screen. You want to remove the border radius from it. So you can do that. This is a real-life example. I'm working on an app for a client of mine, and it's this is not a hotel app, by the way. This is a parking app. We're trying to build a sort of an app that would solve the parking problem in Amsterdam. And I added the magic move transition, and you can kind of see what's going on if you take a look. So you click on you click on the thing at the bottom, and it zooms up nicely to the top. And there's actually multiple. Pardon. There's actually multiple text there. It's too fast, right? You can see the NH hotel, but there's also the stars on the bottom. So in the first screen, they're actually white, but then in the second one, they're blue. And there's a sort of like a dissolve effect going on, so it's really smooth. What's next? Well, so Magic Move is really is quite a young library. I'm really happy and thrilled to see that there's so many GitHub stars already. One of the things is that all the shared element transitions that are going on your screen are independent. So I think it's important that I work on synchronizing that and also synchronizing it with the router. So the router. Imagine you have like a gesture. The router, you make this gesture to go back to the previous screen. Then you can kind of hold it. You can move it around. And I also want to convey this information to the Magic Move library, so we can actually stop and resume these animations. Another thing is enter and leave animations. Currently, the examples I showed, it's being done by Animatable, but there's a drawback there. It's currently not possible to identify an element as both a candidate for a shared element transition and an enter or exit animation. So imagine you have a screen that when you go to it, you want to have a shared element transition, and when it fades out, or when it's removed, that it does a fade out on that element. That's currently not possible. Another thing is scene effects, and I put a vergrootglas icoontje. I don't know how that is in English. Magnifying glass. Thank you for the Dutch guy there. So the scene effects is just an idea that I have, and I would like to explore that further. So with the clone, the native optimization, it's possible to take like a snapshot of a whole view, and you can even do that of a scene, of a complete scene, not just an element. And what you can then, for instance, do is make that very small, because you now have a sort of like a bitmap that you can efficiently render onto the screen. And so imagine you can like click on an item, and actually the screen would zoom out of it. And you can do this kind of effects fairly cheaply. So I'm looking forward to exploring that further. And further optimizations. So what's important is that you don't want to see any flickering during these transitions. So we just have to keep working on optimizing it and making it as efficient as can be. And that's it. That's it for the talk. Thank you very much. And if you want to know more, please head out to the repo. There's a lot more information you can find there. If you're interested in the source code of this presentation, it's right there. And yeah, well, thank you very much.